Jim Henson, The Biography, by Brian J. Jones. Picture this. It's 1973, and you're standing on a television set that's about to change everything. The place is absolutely buzzing with organized chaos. Technicians are fiddling with lights, crew members are shuffling sets around, and there's this electric feeling in the air, like something magical is about to happen. Right in the middle of all this madness, there's one guy who looks like he doesn't have a care in the world. His name is Jim Henson, and he's sprawled out on a couch like he's lounging in his own living room. His impossibly long legs are stretched out in front of him, fingers peacefully laced across his stomach. And draped across his lap, just a simple piece of green fleece shaped like a frog, mouth hanging open, staring blankly at the floor like a discarded dish rag. Then someone shouts, "Blue sky!" It's actually code for, "Hey everyone, there's a kid on set, so maybe tone down the colorful language." Jim slowly unfolds himself and stands up. His young co-star, a little girl named Joey, has just arrived. He gets down on the floor beside her stool, and with this totally casual movement, he pulls that green frog onto his right arm. His hand slides inside, thumb separating from his fingers to form the mouth. He brings the frog's face up toward his own, tilts its head just slightly, and then something absolutely incredible happens. In that exact moment, Kermit the Frog comes to life. "Hey, can you sing the alphabet, Joey?" Kermit asks. Joey nods with that serious confidence only kids have. "Yes, I could." She starts strong, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then, with this mischievous little giggle, she sings out, "Cookie Monster!" The whole studio freezes. Everyone's watching the frog, wondering what's about to happen, and instantly, Kermit's face transforms into this perfect expression of surprise. He turns to the giggling girl. "You're not singing the alphabet," he says, but here's the beautiful part. He's not actually annoyed. There's this playful, cheerful energy to it. So they start over. And of course, Joey does it again, substituting "Cookie Monster" for another letter and dissolving into giggles. Kermit puts on this act of being fed up, griping, "Next time, Cookie Monster can do it with you. I'm leaving." He skulks away, disappearing from the camera's view. Joey stares after him for a beat, then says, as matter-of-factly as only a child can, to the empty space where the frog used to be, "I love you." And just like that, Jim bounces Kermit right back into frame. "I love you too," Kermit says, his voice warm as sunshine. Joey wraps an arm around him and plants a kiss on his fuzzy green head. That tiny, completely unscripted moment, that's where you see the heart of Jim Henson's genius. It wasn't really about the puppets at all. It was about connection, about kindness, about understanding what makes us human. Today, we're going to dive into the life of this extraordinary creator, as told in Brian J. Jones's wonderful biography. We'll discover how a quiet kid from Mississippi, who honestly had zero interest in puppetry at first, built a global entertainment empire based on one simple idea: leave the world a little bit better than you found it. By the time we're done, you won't just know about the guy who made the Muppets. You'll understand how a gentle soul with relentless creativity can literally change the world. Jim Henson's story doesn't start in some glamorous TV studio. It begins in the sleepy, humid lowlands of the Mississippi Delta. Born James Maury Henson on September 24, 1936, in Greenville, Mississippi, his early childhood sounds like something straight out of a Mark Twain novel. He'd later describe it as an idyllic time, days spent exploring the banks of Deer Creek, watching birds, and occasionally taking shots at water moccasins with his BB gun just to watch them squirm. His dad, Paul Henson, was the practical, quiet type who worked as a government agronomist at a local agricultural research station. From his father's side, Jim got that steady, even-tempered personality and solid Midwestern roots. But the creative spark, that whimsical magic that would eventually define everything he touched, that came straight from his mother, Betty, and her family line. You can trace that artistic streak all the way back to his great-grandfather on his mother's side, a talented Civil War-era mapmaker named Oscar Hinrichs. Oscar passed his artistic gifts down to his daughter, Sarah, Jim's grandmother. Everyone called her dear, and honestly, she was like a creative tornado. She could paint, draw, sew, carve, use hand tools like a craftsman, talents that her grandson Jimmy would eventually use to sketch, carve, and sew his very first Muppets. But Dear was way more than just talented. She was Jim's first and most important creative champion. While his mother Betty often focused her attention on his older, more fragile brother Paul Jr., Jim was left to his own devices a lot. But when Dear would visit from Maryland, she and Jim would disappear into a world of paint, pencils, and glue. She encouraged his goofy drawings of bug-eyed birds and wide-mouthed monsters, teaching him how just putting two simple dots for eyes could express an entire world of emotion. She was his best audience, totally into his love for puns and practical jokes, quietly building up his confidence that he could be anything he wanted. Jim's wife Jane later said he knew he was extraordinary, but in a quiet way where he just quietly knew that he knew things. That quiet confidence? It started with Dear. Young Jim was one of those kids who was always making something. He was the type who could figure out clever ways to make games more fun, whether it was building clothespin guns that fired rubber bands or pretending to be a Swami charming a garden hose like it was a snake. He and his friends would spend Saturdays at the local movie theater, the Temple, soaking up double features, cartoons, and newsreels. Then they'd spend the rest of the week reenacting what they'd seen, building elaborate props and costumes from whatever they could scrounge up. One of his childhood buddies, Gordon Jones, remembered Jim bringing him a piece of charred cork cut into a star shape so he could mark his wrist like the hero from their favorite movie serial, The Desert Hawk. It was such a simple, clever solution that nobody else had thought of. Even as a kid, Jones said, Jim had something the rest of us didn't have, an unusual degree of originality. But as much as he loved movies, there was a different medium that really captured his imagination: radio. He was into the old radio dramas like The Green Hornet and The Shadow, but his absolute favorite was the ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his dummy Charlie McCarthy. Bergen was kind of a weird phenomenon when you think about it. A ventriloquist who became a huge star on radio, where nobody could even see if his lips were moving. But for young Jim, it wasn't about the technical skill. It was about the magic. I wasn't thinking of any of those people as puppets, he said later. They were human to me. He got that through a character like Charlie McCarthy. Bergen could say things that couldn't be said by ordinary people. There was this freedom, this kind of magic, in letting a character at the end of your arm speak truths you couldn't say yourself. It was a lesson that stuck with him forever. In 1948, when Jim was 12, the Henson family packed up and moved back to Maryland, settling in Hyattsville, not far from Washington, D.C. This move turned out to be absolutely huge, because now another kind of magic was about to enter his life. In 1949, Jim saw television for the first time at a friend's house. He was completely mesmerized. I loved the idea that what you saw was taking place somewhere else at the same time, he remembered. It was one of those absolutely wonderful things. He was so captivated that he basically badgered his family non-stop until they bought one. In 1950, the Hensons got their television, and for Jim, it was like the world cracked wide open. He watched everything. He absorbed it all: variety shows, comedies, all the technical tricks. He was especially into comedians like Milton Berle and Sid Caesar, but it was the experimental genius of Ernie Kovacs that really got to him. Kovacs understood something crucial. Television wasn't just a window into a studio somewhere. It was its own unique reality. He'd pull these visual tricks, like tilting both the camera and the set at the same angle to make it look like objects were rolling uphill, that only worked on a television screen. The lesson was crystal clear. What the camera sees is what the audience believes. Jim would soon apply that lesson in ways nobody had ever imagined. As he devoured this magical new medium, one thing became totally clear. I immediately wanted to work in television, he said. He wasn't exactly sure what he wanted to do, but he knew he had to be part of it somehow. His chance came in the spring of 1954, during his senior year of high school. A local TV station, WTOP, was looking for young people who could work marionettes for a new children's show. Jim saw his opening. Here's the thing, though. He didn't know anything about puppetry. When I was a kid, I never saw a puppet show, he admitted later. I never played with puppets or had any interest in them. It was just a means to an end. But if puppetry was his ticket into a television studio, he was going to become the best puppeteer he could be, and fast. He rushed to the library and grabbed 2 books on puppetry. With help from a friend, he built his very first Muppet right there in his living room. A small, skinny hand puppet with a rat head he carved from plastic wood, complete with sunglasses and a beret. He named it Pierre the French Rat. Armed with Pierre, he auditioned for the show. He got the job. Just like that, 17-year-old Jim Henson was in television. His first show, the Junior Morning Show, got canceled after just 3 weeks for violating child labor laws. Turns out some of the other puppeteers were too young. But Jim had already made an impression. He landed a few more spots on local shows, mostly just lip-syncing his puppets to records. It was fun, but he still didn't take it that seriously. It was just a way to work his way through college at the University of Maryland, where he was studying theater and television design. Then a program director from the local NBC affiliate, WRC-TV, saw his work and offered him a spot on a new daily variety show called Afternoon. This was bigger, and Jim knew he needed help. He found it in a puppetry class he was taking at the university. The class was part of the home economics department, which Jim had switched into because it had way fewer math and science requirements and, as he later joked, because the classes had about 6 guys and 500 girls. Oh, it was marvelous. One of those 500 girls was an art and education major named Jane Nebel. She was talented, had this dry, edgy sense of humor, and she could really work a puppet. During a class project, Jim was so impressed with her nimble performance that he asked her to help him out on Afternoon. On March 7, 1955, Afternoon debuted, and with it, something brand new appeared in the TV listings. The Washington Post mentioned the show would feature special features by the Muppets, who are puppeteers. It was the very first time the word Muppets ever appeared in print. Jim had made up the term himself. For years he'd say it was a combination of marionettes and Biography, puppets. But later he admitted it was just a word he invented. Like the name of his favorite bird, the grackle, it was simply a word that sounded right. Jim and Jane's segments on Afternoon were a hit. They were supposed to be doing kids stuff, but, as Jane remembered, we were college students amusing ourselves, and we did these wild things with the puppets. They lip-synced to the madcap comedy records of Stan Freberg, dressed characters in crazy wigs, ended songs with explosions, and sometimes had one creature just straight-up devour another. It was absurd, chaotic, and people absolutely loved it. The show's producer Carl Deegan summed it up perfectly when he told the Washington Post, "The kid is positively a genius. He's absolutely amazing." The station was so impressed that after just 2 months, they gave Jim and Jane their own 5-minute show, squeezed right between the late-night news and The Tonight Show. That's prime real estate in TV land, and Jim was about to build something incredible on it. On May 9, 1955, Sam and Friends premiered. Free from the constraints of someone else's variety show, Jim and Jane could finally create their own manic little world. The show centered around Sam, a bald, bulb-nosed human character with this perpetually surprised expression. But the real stars were the Friends, a cast of abstract, colorful creatures like Harry the Hipster, the skull-like Yorick, and a fuzzy thing named Mushmelon. And then there was another character, one Jim had built while sitting by his dying grandfather's bedside. He'd sewn it from an old turquoise felt coat that belonged to his mother, and for eyes, he just glued on 2 halves of a ping-pong ball. From the simplest materials, born from a moment of grief, one of the world's most beloved characters came into being. His name was Kermit. At the time, Jim didn't call him a frog. He was just another abstract character, which Jim felt was slightly more pure, because it forced the audience to use their imagination. But it wasn't just the characters that made Sam and Friends different from everything else on television. It was how Jim presented them. Up until this point, television puppetry was basically just filming a puppet show. Performers like Bert Tillstrom on Kukla, Fran and Ollie would stand behind a traditional puppet stage, hidden from view. But Jim, inspired by the visual trickery of Ernie Kovacs, realized something revolutionary. He didn't need a puppet stage at all. The television screen itself was his stage. He understood this fundamental truth about the medium. The TV audience can only see what the camera shows them. So he could kneel just below the camera's view, giving the Muppets the entire screen to exist and perform in. This simple idea was revolutionary. But he went even further. To know exactly what the camera was seeing, Jim started watching his performance on a television monitor placed on the floor right in front of him. This was brilliant. It let him see what the audience at home was seeing in real time, so he could adjust his performance for the best effect. It also created this powerful dynamic. The puppeteer was both performer and audience simultaneously. As long as he and Jane stayed out of the shot, the Muppets could move freely, even getting right up close to the camera for an intimate moment, something that was impossible with a traditional puppet stage. It wasn't a puppet show being filmed anymore. It was puppetry created specifically for television. He also revolutionized the puppets themselves. With the camera allowing for close-ups, he needed puppets that could actually express emotion. Instead of rigid, wooden heads, he started sculpting heads out of foam rubber and covering them with fabric. This flexibility could convey a huge range of feelings through just the slightest tilt of a head or scrunch of the mouth. He also figured out how critical the eyes were, discovering that by slightly crossing them, he could give his characters this sharp focus and look of keen attentiveness, instead of that vacant puppet stare. Sam and Friends became a local sensation, earning Jim his first Emmy Award when he was only 21. He was still just a college student making what he called an astronomical $100 a week, but he still didn't take puppetry seriously. It didn't seem to be the sort of thing a grown man works at for a living, he said. He figured he'd eventually end up in scenic design or advertising art. But life had other plans brewing. In 1957, an advertising agency approached him to create a series of 10-second commercials for Wilkins Coffee. The spots had to be quick, memorable, and funny. Jim took a completely different approach. We tried to sell things by making people laugh, he explained. He created 2 new characters, the cheerful Wilkins, who absolutely loved Wilkins coffee, and the grumpy Watkins, who flat-out refused to drink it. The formula was beautifully simple. Wilkins asks Watkins to try the coffee. Watkins refuses, and Wilkins lets him have it, often in increasingly absurd and violent ways. Watkins got clubbed, shot, blown up and run over, all for refusing to try a cup of coffee. The ads were an absolute sensation. They were silly, subversive, and people couldn't get enough. Sales of Wilkins coffee shot up by 25%. The commercials were so popular that other companies across the country wanted the Muppets selling their products too. Jim was suddenly making serious money, but more importantly, he was finding his voice, literally. The Wilkins spots were the first time he started doing distinct voices for his characters, giving Wilkins this high, quavering voice, and Watkins a gruff rasp that would eventually become the voice of Ralph the dog. Despite all this success, Jim was restless. In 1958, he decided to quit his show, leave puppetry behind, and head to Europe to become a painter. He was an artist, after all, but in Europe he discovered something that completely changed his perspective. He saw that puppetry wasn't just kids' stuff. It was a serious, respected art form. In Europe, he said with genuine amazement, everyone goes to puppet shows. He encountered craftspeople who took immense pride in their work, performing in theaters that could rival opera houses. That was the first time I'd ever met any other puppeteers, he said. They were very serious about their work. I thought that what they were doing was really interesting. It was a total turning point. He finally had an answer to the question that had been nagging at him for years. Why are you wasting your time with those puppets? The answer was, he wasn't. It was at that point I realized that puppetry was an art form, a valid way to do really interesting things, he said. I came back from that trip all fired up to do wonderful puppetry. He came back with fresh purpose and a new life partner. In 1959, he and Jane Nebel got married. They'd formed Muppets, Inc. a year earlier, and their relationship had always been professional first. But working so closely together, their connection deepened. He had it in his mind that we were supposed to get married, Jane recalled. He said, "We're going to do this with the puppets, and then we're going to get married." It was as much a business proposal as a marriage proposal, but it was built on a shared passion for art and for each other. Our agreement, Jane said firmly, was that we would support his work. In the early 1960s, Jim's work was reaching new heights. The Muppets were making regular appearances on national variety shows, like The Today Show and The Ed Sullivan Show. But it was a new character that would turn them into a genuine national phenomenon. For a series of commercials for Purina Dog Chow, Jim created this laid-back, piano-playing dog named Rolf. When country singer Jimmy Dean was looking for a regular guest for his new variety show, he remembered that funny dog from the commercials and hired him. The chemistry between the easygoing Dean and the wisecracking Ralph was just electric. Viewers sent Ralph over 2,000 fan letters a week, more than Dean himself got. For the first time, a Muppet was interacting with a human host, not as a puppet, but as a believable, independent character. Dean believed in Rolf so completely that the audience couldn't help but believe too. Most importantly, Rolf's success on a primetime show aimed at adults proved what Jim had been arguing for years. Puppets weren't just for kids. But Jim was always pushing forward, always hunting for the next challenge. His mind was this constant whirlwind of ideas. He wrote and directed an experimental, Oscar-nominated short film called Timepiece, this frantic, puppet-free exploration of time and anxiety that played like an early music video. He was fascinated by folklore and fairy tales, producing a series of specials called Tales from Muppetland, which included Hey Cinderella and The Frog Prince. And he dreamed of creating a full half-hour television show starring the Muppets, a primetime variety show that would showcase their unique brand of chaos and comedy. For years he pitched the idea to American television networks, but the answer was always the same. Executives couldn't see past the puppets. "Puppets are for kids," they'd say. "We don't do puppets at night," was the constant refrain. Then, in 1975, Jim found this unlikely champion in a British media mogul named Lord Lou Grade. Grade, an old-school showman, saw the potential in Jim's vision and offered to produce the show in England. It was a massive gamble. Jim would have to move his family and his entire company to London, but it was the only way to get his dream on the air. He took the deal. In 1976, The Muppet Show premiered. Set in a rundown vaudeville theater, the show-within-a-show format allowed for chaos both on stage and backstage. Jim wisely put his most reliable character, Kermit the Frog, right at the center, playing the perpetually frazzled host, trying desperately to hold the show together amidst a cast of lovable lunatics. There was the insecure comedian Fozzie Bear, the daredevil Gonzo the Great, the rock band Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, and the heckling old curmudgeons Statler and Waldorf up in the balcony. And then there was Miss Piggy. She started as a minor character, just one of many pigs in the chorus. But in the hands of performer Frank Oz, she started stealing every single scene she was in. The chemistry between Jim as Kermit and Oz as Piggy was absolutely undeniable. "I was working as Miss Piggy with Jim," Oz remembered, "and the script called for her to slap him. Instead of a slap, I gave him a funny karate hit. Somehow, that hit crystallized her character for me, the coyness hiding the aggression. A star was born." The Muppet Show was unlike anything else on television. It was clever, witty, and had this slightly dangerous edge to it. It attracted A-list guest stars like Rita Moreno, Steve Martin, and Elton John, all eager to play in Jim's creative sandbox. The show became this massive global phenomenon, watched by 235 million people in over 100 countries each week. For a while there, it was literally the most popular show in the entire world. Muppet Mania had swept the globe. The show's success finally opened the door to Hollywood. In 1979, Jim directed the Muppet movie, this road trip adventure that told the origin story of how all the Muppets met. It was another huge risk. Nobody had ever made a full-length feature film starring puppets interacting in the real world. Jim had to invent new techniques as he went along, digging pits for puppeteers to stand in, rigging cars to be driven from the trunk, and even performing Kermit from inside this custom-made diving bell submerged in a swamp to get the film's iconic opening shot. The movie was a massive hit, pulling in over $65 million and earning 2 Academy Award nominations. Jim Henson had conquered television and film. He'd built this empire on a foundation of felt and foam rubber. But he was still restless. He was an artist, an innovator, and he was always looking for the next frontier. That frontier would take him into a world far beyond the Muppets, into a realm of pure imagination. He'd always been fascinated by fantasy. In the late 1970s, he met this British fantasy artist named Brian Froud, whose ethereal drawings of trolls, fairies, and goblins totally captivated him. Together, they started imagining a new kind of film, one without any humans at all, set in a world populated entirely by fantastic creatures. The result was 1982's The Dark Crystal, this breathtakingly ambitious film that took 5 years to make. It was a total passion project, so complex and technically demanding that it pushed the boundaries of what puppetry could be. The puppets, or creatures as Jim preferred to call them, were the most realistic ever created, blending traditional puppetry with cutting-edge robotics and animatronics. Jim poured his heart, soul, and a huge chunk of his own money into the film, even buying it back from the studio when they tried to interfere with his artistic vision. But when the film came out, audiences were kind of baffled. It was visually stunning, sure, but the story was dark and complex, and it lacked the humor and warmth of the Muppets. The film did okay at the box office, but for Jim, the lukewarm reception was a devastating blow. He followed it up with another fantasy film, 1986's Labyrinth, a collaboration with executive producer George Lucas, starring David Bowie as this charismatic Goblin King. This time, Jim tried to blend the fantasy elements with music and a lighter tone, but again, the story struggled to connect with audiences. The failure of Labyrinth at the box office was another deep disappointment. I think that was the closest I've ever seen him to turning in on himself and getting quite depressed, his son Brian remembered. He was creatively exhausted and feeling the weight of running a global company. The guy who loved to play and create was spending more and more time in boardrooms and budget meetings. He'd created this wonderful, chaotic family of characters and performers, and he felt responsible for keeping them all working. The joy was starting to fade. In 1989, he made a decision that would secure the future of his creations and, he hoped, free him up to be an artist again. He started negotiations to sell his company to the one person he felt could be a worthy guardian of his legacy: Disney. It felt like a dream coming true. "I think hooking up with Disney creates such a wonderful force," he said, beaming. The deal would let him focus on what he loved most, creating, while Disney handled all the business stuff. He was especially excited about developing new attractions for Disney theme parks, a playground he'd admired his entire life. The negotiations dragged on for months and were pretty difficult, but in the spring of 1990, it seemed like they were finally nearing the finish line. Jim was full of energy, flying between New York, Los Angeles, and Orlando, working on new Disney projects and planning for the future. He was tired, but he was happy. "I never saw this friend of mine so happy," said his producer David Laser. On the afternoon of Friday, May 4, 1990, Jim taped an appearance on the Arsenio Hall show. He wasn't feeling great, complaining about a sore throat, but he insisted it was just a cold. Over the next week he kept working, traveling to North Carolina to visit his father. By the time he got back to New York, he felt worse. He was coughing violently and having trouble breathing. On Monday, for the first time anyone could remember, Jim Henson called in sick. Jane, who he was separated from but remained incredibly close to, came to his apartment to check on him. She begged him to see a doctor, but he refused, insisting he just needed sleep. By the early hours of Tuesday morning, he could barely breathe. He finally agreed to go to the hospital. He walked into the emergency room, under his own power, at 4:58 in the morning. He developed this rare and aggressive form of bacterial pneumonia. The infection was spreading with terrifying speed. Doctors threw everything they had at it, but his organs were shutting down. He never regained consciousness. Just after 1 in the morning on Wednesday, May 16, 1990, Jim Henson died. He was 53 years old. The world was absolutely stunned. The creator of so much joy and laughter was gone. But even in death, Jim had one last performance to direct. He'd left 2 letters for his children, to be opened if he died. In them, he expressed his views on life and death, with his characteristic warmth and optimism. "I'm not at all afraid of the thought of death," he wrote, "and in many ways look forward to it with much curiosity and interest. Please don't feel bad that I'm gone." He even left specific instructions for his own memorial service. He wanted it to be a celebration, not a funeral. "It would be lovely if some of the people who sing would do a song or two, some of which should be quite happy and joyful," he wrote. "Incidentally, I'd love to have a Dixieland band play and end with a rousing version of Saints," and that's exactly what they did. At his memorial service at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York, thousands gathered to celebrate his life. Nobody wore black. The Muppet performers sang his favorite silly songs. Harry Belafonte performed "Turn the World Around," and a lone big bird walked up the aisle to sing this heartbreakingly beautiful version of "Bean Green." At the end, just as Jim had wanted, the Dirty Dozen brass band launched into "When the Saints Go Marching In," and everyone marched out of that cathedral, smiling through their tears. It was this final, perfect expression of Jim Henson's philosophy, a philosophy summed up in another passage from his letter to his children. "Please watch out for each other, and love and forgive everybody. It's a good life, enjoy it." Reading through Jim Henson's life story, you can't help but feel this profound sense of wonder. Here was someone who built an empire, who completely redefined a medium, who created characters that are now just woven into the fabric of our culture. And he did it all with this quiet grace, gentle spirit, and what he himself called ridiculous optimism. His life offers so many lessons, but there are a few that feel truly timeless. First is this idea of embracing the means to an end. Jim Henson didn't set out to be a puppeteer. He wanted to work in television, and puppets just happened to be the most available path. It's this powerful reminder that your life's passion doesn't always announce itself with fireworks and fanfare. Sometimes it's the side project, the thing you do just to get your foot in the door, that becomes your life's work. It teaches us to stay open to those unexpected detours, because that's often where the real magic happens. Second is the power of innovation through ignorance. Jim succeeded in television puppetry precisely because he didn't know the rules. He didn't know you were supposed to hide behind a puppet stage, so he used the entire television screen as his canvas. He didn't know puppets were supposed to be rigid, so he made them from soft, expressive materials that could genuinely connect with an audience emotionally. He shows us that sometimes, not knowing how something is supposed to be done is actually the greatest creative advantage you can have. It frees you up to invent something better. And finally, there's the core of his philosophy, the blend of what his friend Jerry Jewell called the sacred and the silly. Jim's work was often outrageously silly. Puppets exploding, monsters devouring things, chickens clucking to classical music. But underneath all that chaos, there was this deep sense of decency, a belief in the goodness of people, and a genuine desire to make the world better. He believed you could teach important lessons about cooperation, understanding, and self-acceptance without ever sacrificing the fun. He proved that you could be both silly and profound at the exact same time. If you take just one thing away from Jim Henson's story, let it be this: believe in the power of your own unique vision, even when the world keeps telling you it's impossible. For decades, Jim was told that puppets were just for kids, that they had no place in primetime or on the big screen. He simply refused to believe it. He had what you might call a whim of steel, and he followed that whim with gentle but unyielding determination. He showed us that the most powerful force in the world isn't brute strength or cunning. It's quiet, persistent, joyful creativity. That was the book summary of Jim Henson, The Biography, by Brian J. Jones. We've journeyed through the major milestones of his incredible life today, but I've got to be honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found in exploring the territory yourself. The true magic of this book is in the small details, the quiet moments of reflection, and the deeply personal stories that don't always make it into a summary. This overview is meant to help you see if this incredible story is one you want to spend more time with. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or touched your heart, I really encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning about a great artist. It's an experience that might just change the way you look at your own creative potential and your place in the world. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. It lets us know that these deep dives into the lives of extraordinary people are what you want to see more of. We've got so many more journeys to take together into the bookshelves of the world's most brilliant minds. Let's keep growing together.